Right before we jump into this video, if you'd like me to send you a free guide to capturing motion in low light situations, just look for this orange box over on FroKnowsPhoto.com, put your name, email address in it, hit send it. I'm gonna send you that guide for free. Jared Polin, FroKnowsPhoto.com, and this is a comparison between the Sony a7R5 and the Sony a7R4. Now, the reason that I'm making this video is to help anybody that already has an a7R4 to decide whether or not they need an a7R5, or if you're new to looking into this type of camera, to help you decide should you save some money and go with a generation ago model or to go with the newer model. So what I'm gonna do in this video is I'm gonna go through the different specs. I'm gonna tell you which camera I think comes out on top and where the pros and the cons are. But also, I've taken both of these cameras out into real world situations. The a7R4 I took out on the road with me with Bernie Sanders and used it for about a year until the Sony a1 came out. And then the Sony a7R5 I've taken out to do a bunch of different photo shoots, including shooting soccer, to test out the new autofocusing system that is in this body. But now let's jump into the specs. Starting with the sensors and processors inside of these cameras. The Sony a7R4 has a 61 megapixel full frame BSI CMOS sensor that's powered by a Bions X processor. And the Sony a7R5 had a lot of questions before it came out on whether or not it would have the same image sensor or the same processor, and the answer to that is, well, one of both. It has the same image sensor that you find in the older model, but it goes with a Bions XR processor, which Sony says you'll get better detail and quality out of the newer processor. Now, this is something that Sony has done in the past. When they went from the a7R2 to the a7R3, they kept the same sensor but upgrade things around it, and they're able to pull more quality out of it when they upgrade. In this case, is it worthwhile to get the upgrade? And my answer is yeah. I mean, there's going to be a lot of yes, the upgrade is worth it for some people. If you've had the a7R4 for a while at this point and you're happy with the results, which I honestly was very happy with the results that I got from it, it may not be that big of a deal to go up to the newer camera. We'll talk more about pros versus amateurs and making that decision by the end of this video. But in terms of processors, yeah, I like the newer processor for the fact that it will give me a slightly better edge on image quality. Next up, we have the lens mounts. Now, these both have the Sony E-mount, which gives you the option to use Sony native glass, G Master glass, and the other glass that they make, as well as Tamron and Sigma E-mount lenses. So neither of these cameras get an advantage for the E-mount because that's just what it is. Moving on to frame rate. How many frames a second can you get? Well, Sony tells us we can get 10 frames a second with both of these cameras, and I've never achieved 10 frames a second with both of these cameras when shooting uncompressed RAW. When you shoot uncompressed RAW, you're only gonna get roughly 6 frames per second. Now, if you do shoot JPEG straight up, you're gonna get your 10 frames a second when you go into the high plus mode. One of the things I don't like that Sony does is when you go into the high plus mode, it doesn't automatically say that your RAW file will become compressed. So if I go into high plus thinking that I'm shooting the highest frame rate possible, well, I'm not actually getting the highest frame rate possible unless I dumb down my RAW file to a compressed RAW file. Now, that's with the mechanical shutter. What about the electronic shutter? It's kind of weird that you actually get less frames per second than with the mechanical shutter, but that's something that Sony has done here. Now, one of the differences between these two cameras is the fact that you can shoot 3 different size RAW files with the Sony a7R5. You can do a RAW small at 15 megapixels, a medium at 26 megapixels, and a large at 61 megapixels. On the flip side, with the R4, you can shoot 15 megapixels, a small file, but that's only going to be JPEG. The 26 and the 61, you can squeeze out the RAW files. Now, speaking of RAW files, do they take up a lot of space? And the answer is, Steven?
Yes.
Yeah, 126 megabytes a piece when you are shooting uncompressed RAW. So they are big files, they are going to take up a lot of space, but space is cheap these days, not to go to outer space, even though technically if you were to get onto a SpaceX flight, it's much cheaper than if you were going to do it with NASA. But that's a whole different story for a different day. So yeah, it's nice that you have the option to do the smaller RAW files on the a7R5. Personally, I always recommend shooting in the highest quality possible at all times because you can always dumb it down, you can't dumb it back up. The 26 megapixels on the a7R4 is actually cropped into a DX crop mode, so that's how you're getting that smaller file, but you get a little bit more reach. It's basically cropping in to the full frame. Whereas on the A7R5, it's not cropping in with that 26 megapixel file, but it's oversampling and giving you better quality. Moving on to the memory card slots, kind of one of the only places where there's a major difference. You've got two CF Express Type A slots on this camera, and you have two UHS 2 SD card slots on the A7R4. Now, I do have to say that on the A7R5, those two card slots that are in there actually work as kind of 4 card slots, because you could put SD cards in there, or you could put the CF Express Type A cards. Now, keep in mind, CF Express Type A cards are a lot more expensive, but they are much faster, and you're going to get faster transfer rates and faster dumping rates to the card when you use those. I recommend using those. Just understand that they're 160 gig cards, the 325 gig cards, and the 600 and whatever gig cards. They're very expensive. My whole thing with redundant cards, I love having 2 cards in the camera at all time. I'm shooting RAW to card 1 and RAW to card 2. No matter what I do, I don't separate anything else. I don't want RAW to one card and then overflow to the other. Just shoot redundant, so you always have double your RAW files. Continuing on, let's go to focusing points. The A7R5 has 693 phase detect AF points. It has IAF, lock-on tracking, AI-powered chip, which is new, with deep learning, human, animal, bird, insect, vehicle, airplane, train, autofocus. It has all of those things. Why do you need train autofocus? How many times are you taking pictures of trains? Autofocus is gonna track a train. It's freaking big. And an airplane, all you need to do is lock onto something on an airplane, and it's gonna lock onto it. So this is kind of weird that they make a big deal out of all of that. Now, all options are also available in video mode, and you also have focus mapping. And on to the A7R4, you have 567 phase detect AF points. You got IAF, lock-on tracking, human, animal AF, and only human AF is available in video mode. So you can see there is a new chip and a new AI chip inside the Sony a7R5, and that would be the biggest reason you would want to upgrade from the a7R4 to the a7R5, is if you need that new tracking capability. It is a big difference. It finds the bodies, it finds the heads, it finds the eyes, the back of the heads, the torsos. It finds everything much easier and much better. It's more reliable, it's more sticky. I did like the autofocus that the a7R5 was upgraded to. That's not to say that the a7R4 doesn't have good autofocus. If it's done everything that you need it to do up until this point, then there's no reason for you to dump it just to upgrade. I used this camera to photograph the portrait of Bernie Sanders, and it nailed the focus. When I let the IAF actually work, and the one time I turned it off, it focused on the glasses. So you could see that when I turned it back on, it nailed the eye with the 135-1.8. It just absolutely nailed it. It's a beautiful shot. So I will say, if I was choosing to upgrade, that I would absolutely look at this new AI chip and the deep learning as the reason that I would want to do it, because I want that better autofocus. But if you're shooting landscapes, if you're doing portraits, if you're doing birds, then sure, you want to track it. But this isn't really the birding type camera unless you're just going to crop a lot because you got the 61 megapixels. But that was one of the biggest differences between these two cameras, is that new AI chip, which if you're into the Sony world, you're going to start to see that probably added to future cameras. Let me jump in here real quick because I want to show you this photo taken with the Sony a7R4 and edited with 10 different presets from FroPack 3, starting with Fifth Element. That looks great. Followed by Almost Famous, Canadian Tuxedo, Eckert, Gotham for People, King Contrast, MDMA, Mentos, November Rain, and Walter White. But let's go look at this photo taken with the Sony a7R5, and let's edit it with Skittles from FroPack 1. One click, Skittles, boom. So look, if you're looking to speed up your RAW workflow or give yourself a great starting point on the desktop or on mobile, we created 15 custom Lightroom presets that you can check out right now at FroKnowsPhoto.com/FroPack3. While you're over there, you can play with the sliders to see the befores and the afters. If you decide to pick them up right now, they're currently on sale. Or if you want to get the triple play bundle with FroPack 1, 2, and 3 that includes Skittles, you can do that and save even more. Now, let's get back to the video. Now, even though both of these cameras are primarily stills focused cameras, they also have some powerful video features. Let's start with the A7R5. You can shoot UHD 8K video recording with a 1.2x crop up to 24 frames a second with no pixel binning. In terms of full frame 4K, you can do up to 60 frames per second with a 1.2x crop with pixel binning. And in Super 35 cropped 4K, you can do that up to 30 frames per second oversampled from 6.2K with no pixel binning. Now, that last mode is the one that's going to give you the best quality out of this camera when it comes to shooting video. You can shoot 1080p up to 120 frames per second. Most video modes are available in 10-bit 422 color except 8K, which is 420. Now, if you want to do some external recording, you can get 4K 16-bit raw video output to an external recorder. Now onto the A7R4. Full frame 4K video recording up to 30 frames per second with pixel binning. Super 35 cropped 4K up to 30 frames per second oversampled from 6.2K with no pixel binning. You've got 1080 up to 120 frames per second. All video modes available in only 8-bit 420 color depth, and there is no raw video output. So like I said, these aren't the cameras that you're looking to be your mainstay video shooters, but they do get the job done, and the A7R5 clearly gets the job done with more options and better options over the A7R4. Let's continue on with some of the extra video features that you have, starting with the A7R5. There's a digital hot shoe for cableless audio recording, which is actually pretty cool because it goes right from the hot shoe right into the camera, meaning you don't need to run any extra cables. It has a heat dissipating design with unlimited record time. Now, because it has that heat dissipating design, you can see that the camera is slightly thicker than the A7R4. That's to put that heat dissipating design in, and it really doesn't make it much larger. The bodies are very similar. Like I just said, you have unlimited record time. That's a big deal because you do not have unlimited record time on the A7R4. You have a full HDMI port, you've got focus breathing, S-Log3, as well as S-Cinetone color, and you have dedicated stills video and S&Q top dial, which is up here. You do not have that dial on the A7R4, but you do have that dial on the A7R5. On the flip side here, the A7R4 gives you that 29:59 record limit, so you do not get unlimited record time like this bad boy, and you have a micro HDMI port, which is much smaller, and it's a little more dainty than, of course, a full HDMI port, and you only have S-Log3. The A7R4 also has a digital hot shoe, so they gave it more video features, like I just said a few minutes ago with the A7R5. So if you're looking to do stills, and you're looking to get better video features, and you want to go up from the A7R4, then maybe this would be the feature that does it for you. One of the biggest upgrades to the A7R5 over the R4 is the fact that you have your 5-axis in-body stabilization, but now you're getting up to 8 stops of compensation with the IBIS mechanism alone. So you're getting more image stabilization with the A7R5 than you are with the A7R4. So if that's a big deal to you, then that is a selling point to switch over. Now let's talk about the viewfinder. We've got the 9.44 million dot EVF with 120 frames per second refresh rate in the A7R5, and we have a 5.76 million dot EVF with 120 frames per second refresh rate in the R4. It starts to become very difficult to see the differences between the 9.44 million and the 5 point whatever million. They're both really good electronic viewfinders. Moving on to the LCD screens, on the A7R5, we have a 3.2-inch, 2.36 million dot 4-axis multi-angle touchscreen that can tilt and rotate, and you can touch everything on the camera in the menu. Like, you can actually touch the camera menu and everything. The tilt-out, rotatable, flippable screen is pretty cool because it gives you the best of both worlds. I'm not a big fan of a flip-out rotatable screen that doesn't allow me to actually tilt it back, in which case this one does. On the A7R4, you have a 3-inch, 2.36 million dot tilting touchscreen, and you have limited functions when it comes to touching this LCD screen, like through the menu system and touch focusing. And now that I mentioned menu system, you have the older menu system in the back of this A7R4. If you want the newer menu system that you find, it's updated, it's a little clearer, it's a little easier to find things. And now that I say easier to find things, I actually think it's easier to find things in the, well, no, it's never been easier to find things in the Sony. They've just changed their menu system. They've updated it across the board, and you're getting that update in this camera. Plus, you can use the entire touchscreen to touch just about every function, which you couldn't do on this camera. It kind of had like some dumb features. It's like, why can't I touch this? And it's like, MC Hammer comes out and is like, can't touch this. You will notice a couple of differences between the bodies. As I mentioned, that the A7R5 is a little thicker with the heat dissipating build. You will notice that the record button on the A7R5 for video is now up top. It's replacing the C1 button that was up top on the A7R4. You'll also see this exposure compensation dial has a bunch of numbers on it. They took the numbers off on the other side. I thought that was just a mistake, but it's off there. It's not really something that I ever use anyway. You can still map it out, which is what I did, because I like to make my C1 button my ISO trigger, and so I just changed when I'm shooting stills to trigger the ISO changing by hitting that record button. Other than that, they are very similar feeling bodies. You can still put the same grip on the bottom of them and get the same results. Now, battery power, still using the Z battery, the NPF-Z100 battery. You do get USB-C charging over here on the A7R5, and you also get the USB charging through USB-C on the A7R4. Always nice to be able to give it extra juice through that. The batteries are pretty good. Just understand they're smaller. If you're new to the Sony system, they're slightly smaller, so you want to carry extra batteries. You always want to have extra batteries. Let me jump in here real quick and let you know that this video is brought to you by Squarespace. If you're looking to build your very own online portfolio, use what I use for jaredpolin.com because it's simple, easy, affordable, and I don't need to know coding. To get your 14-day free trial, head on over to squarespace.com/FroKnowsPhoto. If you decide that it's for you, use the code FroKnowsPhoto at checkout to get 10% off your first order. Now, let's get back to the video. And finally, let's talk about pricing. Now, all of this is at the time of this recording on this date, whatever today, what's today? Today is October 19th of 2022 at 11:52 in the AM, and my heartbeat is 95 beats per minute. It's usually much slower when I'm calmer, but I'm yelling right now. Anyway, the A7R5 comes in just shy of $4,000. Now, if you're a professional, as I said earlier, I'm gonna help you decide which one is right for you. If you're a professional and you own the Sony a7R4 and you make a full-time living with this camera, then you should be able to dump this, get the most value out of it you can get now, and put that right into the newer camera. It's worth it as a professional. If you're an amateur person and you're out there shooting every day and it's not that big of a deal, the A7R4 is still a fantastic camera. If you're someone new coming to this system, is it worth saving $1,000 that you could throw into new glass, or is it worth spending that extra roughly $1,000 and going with the newer model? It's tough because they're both very similar. You have that same sensor. You have a different processor. You might get slightly better results, and you will absolutely get better autofocus with the A7R5, but you have to determine, is it worth it? Can you work it? Switch it around and reverse it. So that's up to you to decide which one is right for you if you're the new person. You're that full-time pro, I'm always about upgrading if you need to. It's worth it because you dump this, get money out of it, get a couple, you'll probably get $1,800 to $2,000 out of this camera at this point. And hey, look, if you're new, find someone who's gonna buy an A7R5 and buy their A7R4 used. So that's what I have to say about it. If you've got any input, you can leave it down below with which direction you'd be leaning to and which one of these cameras you would go with. Don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe. That's where I'm gonna leave it. Jared Polin, FroKnowsPhoto.com. See ya.